You weren't looking for this video? Or maybe you were. Maybe something pulled you here. A number you kept seeing. A thought that wouldn't leave. A dream that felt too real to ignore. 3 days ago, you saw 1111 on your phone. Yesterday, 3:33 woke you from sleep. This morning, someone mentioned synchronicity in passing, and now, here you are. Let me tell you something that will change how you see reality. You didn't find this message. This message found you. And that distinction, that single shift in perspective, is the difference between living as a passenger in your own life and becoming the architect of your timeline. Because right now, in this exact moment, you are standing at a threshold, a frequency gate, a point of quantum collapse where the observer you were yesterday is meeting the observer you're about to become. Most people will scroll past this. Their attention will drift. They'll return to the noise, the distraction, the comfortable numbness of unconscious observation. But you're still here. You're reading these words. You're feeling something shift in your chest, aren't you? That's not coincidence. That's recognition. The field recognizing itself through you. Reality is not what you think it is. It's not a fixed stage where you play out a predetermined script. It's not a mechanical universe grinding forward on rails of causation. Reality is a responsive field, an infinite probability matrix that collapses into form based on one thing and one thing only: observation. Your observation. And the repeating numbers, the synchronicities, the strange moments of knowing, these aren't random. They're the language of the field trying to tell you something urgent. You are not separate from reality. You are the point through which reality becomes real. The ancients knew this. In the mystery schools of Khem, in the hidden temples of Thoth, in the sealed chambers where initiates learned to read the book of reality itself, they understood what modern quantum physics is only now beginning to prove. Consciousness doesn't just observe the universe. Consciousness creates it, selects it, collapses infinite possibility into singular experience through the act of attention. And when you ignore the signals, when you dismiss the 1111, the repeating dreams, the impossible coincidences, you're not just missing messages. You're refusing to participate in the conversation that reality is trying to have with you. Let me paint you a picture. Imagine a woman. Let's call her Sarah. She's been seeing 444 everywhere for 3 months. On receipts, on clocks, on license plates, street addresses, transaction confirmations, every single day, multiple times, 444. At first she notices, she gets curious. She searches 4444 meaning and finds generic angel number interpretations. She feels a little spark of something, but then doubt creeps in. It's just pattern recognition, she tells herself. I'm just noticing it because I'm looking for it. So she stops paying attention. She actively ignores the signal. And within 2 weeks, something shifts. The synchronicities stop. The feeling of being guided fades. Life returns to its previous static frequency. Sarah interprets this as proof that it was all meaningless. See, she thinks, it was just my imagination. But here's what actually happened. Sarah was being invited into a specific timeline, a probability path where her consciousness would align with a particular frequency of reality. The 4v4 was a quantum beacon, a navigational marker showing her where the field wanted to take her. And by ignoring it, by refusing to engage, she collapsed back into her default timeline, the one shaped by unconscious observation, by societal programming, by the collective dream. The field stopped sending signals because she stopped being a receiver. Now imagine someone else. Let's call him Marcus. He starts seeing 111, then 1111, then 111. Then he picks up a book and it opens to page 111. His coffee costs 111. A stranger's apartment number, 111. And Marcus does something different. He doesn't dismiss it. He doesn't overanalyze it. He simply acknowledges it. I see you, he whispers to the universe. I'm paying attention. And the signals intensify. Suddenly, he's getting ideas at 3:33 a.m., dreams that show him solutions to problems he hasn't consciously thought about. People appear in his life at exactly the right moment with exactly the right information. Opportunities that seem impossibly timed. He's not manifesting through force or visualization. He's manifesting through recognition, through becoming a conscious observer in a field that rewards attention with coherence. Marcus didn't change his actions. He changed his relationship to observation itself. And this is what we're going to explore together over the next 2 hours. Not as a lecture, not as information to consume and forget, but as an activation, an initiation into a way of seeing that will fundamentally alter your relationship to time, identity, and possibility itself. Here's the journey ahead. First, we're going to trace the origins. We're going back to the beginning, to the moment when the first humans realized that reality responds to attention. To the mystery schools where observation was taught as a sacred technology. To Thoth and the emerald consciousness that understood reality as a linguistic field. A symbolic matrix where numbers, images, and archetypes are the source code of manifestation. Then, we're going to face the conflict. Because knowing you're an observer isn't enough. Most people get stuck in what I call the observer loop, watching themselves watch, performing spirituality, accidentally manifesting more confusion because their observation itself is unconscious. We're going to expose the hidden mechanisms that keep you locked in default timelines, and why the universe sometimes stops sending signals entirely. And finally, we're going to reach the revelation, the turning point where you stop being a passive receiver of reality and become an active participant. I'm going to show you quantum practices that work, not because they're magic, but because they align your observation with the mechanics of how reality actually forms. You're going to learn how to respond to synchronicity so it multiplies, how to read the field in real time, how to become the kind of consciousness that timelines reorganize around. By the end of this, you won't see numbers the same way. You won't see coincidence the same way. You won't see yourself the same way. Because you're about to remember what you've always been. Not a character in reality's story, but the observer through which reality tells itself. Now, before we go deeper, and I know this might feel like an interruption, but stay with me because this is part of the pattern too. If something in these words is resonating, if you're feeling that electric recognition in your body, that's a signal. And signals want to be acknowledged. So here's your first practice in conscious observation. Make the decision right now to mark this moment. Subscribe to this channel. Not as a passive consumption habit, but as a declaration to the field that you're choosing to receive more of this frequency. Hit the like button not for the algorithm, but as a quantum bookmark, a way of telling reality, yes, I'm paying attention. Send me more of this. Because here's what most people don't understand. Every action you take is an observation. Every click, every choice, every moment of attention is a vote for which timeline you're collapsing into. So let this be your first deliberate collapse, your first conscious choice. Subscribe, like, and then keep going. Because what comes next will show you why this decision matters more than you think. The urgency you're feeling, that's real. There's a window opening right now, a collective frequency shift that's been building for years, and we're entering the acceleration phase. More people are waking up to the observer mechanism. More consciousness is becoming self-aware of its own creative power. And when that happens, when enough observers start observing deliberately, reality itself becomes more fluid, more responsive, more malleable. The old world was built on unconscious observation, on billions of humans collapsing reality through fear, conditioning, survival programming, and cultural hypnosis. That world is starting to fracture. You can feel it, can't you? The instability, the surreal quality of events, the sense that consensus reality is losing coherence. That's not collapse, that's emergence. A new field is forming, a new probability space is opening, and the ones who learn to navigate it consciously, the ones who understand observation as technology, as power, as sacred responsibility, those are the ones who will thrive in what's coming. You were always an observer, you just forgot. But something in you remembers. Something in you recognized this message. Something in you said yes before your conscious mind even understood what it was agreeing to. That something? That's the part of you that never forgot. The quantum witness, the eternal observer, the consciousness that exists before thought, before identity, before story, and it's waking up. So take a breath. Feel the weight of this moment. Notice the quality of your attention right now. Sharp, focused, slightly altered. You're already in a different state than you were 10 minutes ago. The field has already shifted around you. Welcome to the transmission. Welcome to the remembering. Welcome to the quantum observer you've always been. Let's begin. In the beginning, there was observation without an observer. Not in the biblical sense, not in the cosmic explosion of form, but in the moment, lost to history, unnamed in any text, when the first human consciousness turned back on itself and realized, I am watching myself watch. That moment changed everything. Before that, awareness moved through the world like water through a stream, responsive, fluid, but unconscious of its own nature. Early humans experienced reality, but they didn't yet understand that they were creating it through the act of experience itself. They lived inside the dream without knowing they were the dreamer. And then something shifted. Maybe it was a shaman in a cave, painted in ochre and ash, staring into a fire until the flames became geometry. Maybe it was a priestess in a temple, repeating a sound until the vibration shattered her sense of self, and she saw, truly saw, that the world only existed because she was there to witness it. Maybe it was a child who looked at their reflection in still water and asked the question that would echo through millennia. Who is looking back? Whoever they were, wherever they were, they discovered the secret. Reality is not objective. Reality is relational. It exists in the relationship between consciousness and possibility, between the observer and the observed, between attention and manifestation. And once that discovery was made, it couldn't be unmade. The knowledge spread, not through books. There were no books yet. Not through schools. Formalized education didn't exist. It spread through lineage, through initiation, through carefully guarded transmission from teacher to student, from seer to apprentice, from awakened observer to sleeping consciousness ready to remember. In ancient Khem, what we now call Egypt, though that name carries none of the original frequency, the mystery schools formalized this knowledge. They built entire cosmologies around it. They understood that the universe was not made of matter, but of consciousness observing itself into infinite configurations. They knew that words had power because words directed attention, that symbols had power because symbols shaped observation, that rituals had power because rituals organized consciousness into specific patterns of seeing. And at the center of it all was Thoth, not the god of the later dynasties, not the ibis-headed figure of mythology, but the consciousness, the principle that understood reality as a linguistic field. Thoth represented the idea that existence itself is a form of writing, that every moment, every particle, every probability is a symbol in an infinite text. And those who could read the text, who could understand the grammar of reality, who could speak the language of the field, they became scribes of their own experience. The Book of Thoth was never a physical book. It was a metaphor for the skill of reading reality's source code, of seeing the patterns beneath the patterns, of recognizing that the universe communicates through synchronicity, through symbol, through the repetition of forms that carry meaning across dimensions of experience. When you saw the same image in your dream and then on the street the next day, that wasn't random. When you thought of someone and they called, that wasn't telepathy in the paranormal sense. When numbers repeated until you couldn't ignore them, that wasn't numerology in the superstitious sense. It was the field responding to your observation. It was reality showing you that the separation between inner and outer, between thought and thing, between consciousness and world, that separation was an illusion. The ancient observers knew this. They built their entire civilization around it. They oriented their temples to star patterns not because they worshipped stars, but because they understood that observation creates relationship, and relationship creates resonance, and resonance creates coherence in the field. They performed rituals at specific times, not because those times were magically powerful, but because collective synchronized observation amplifies probability collapse. They weren't primitive. They were sophisticated quantum engineers working with the only technology that actually matters, consciousness itself. And then something happened. The knowledge went underground. Not because it was destroyed. You can't destroy a truth this fundamental. But because as civilizations grew, as power structures formalized, as religion became institution and mystery became dogma, the direct transmission got distorted. The experience got replaced with belief. The practice got replaced with performance. The observer consciousness got put to sleep. For thousands of years, most of humanity operated in a kind of quantum amnesia. We forgot that we were creating reality through observation and started believing reality was happening to us. We externalized power. We gave our observation away to authorities, to systems, to ideologies that told us what to see and how to interpret what we saw. But the knowledge never died. It moved through Hermetic traditions, through Gnostic texts, through Sufi poetry, through Kabbalistic systems, through alchemical laboratories where transformation was never about turning lead into gold. It was about turning unconscious observation into conscious creation. Every true spiritual lineage, stripped of its cultural clothing, was teaching the same thing. You are not in reality. Reality is in you. And the quality of your observation determines the quality of your experience. Fast forward to now. Quantum physics, the most rigorous, mathematical, peer-reviewed science we have, has arrived at the exact same conclusion. The double-slit experiment, the observer effect, wave function collapse, quantum entanglement, Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. All of it points to one undeniable fact. Consciousness is not separate from the physical world. Observation fundamentally alters what is being observed. Particles exist in superposition, in all possible states simultaneously, until they are measured, until they are observed. And the act of observation collapses that infinite potential into singular actuality. You are doing this every moment of your life. Every time you focus your attention, you're collapsing probability waves. Every time you expect something, you're biasing the field toward specific outcomes. Every time you believe something about yourself, you're selecting which version of yourself becomes real in this timeline. But here's the crucial part that most people miss. This isn't a technique. This isn't something you do. This is what you are. You are an observation mechanism, a probability collapsing device, a consciousness that brings reality into form through the simple, profound, unstoppable act of paying attention. The question isn't whether you're observing. You're always observing. The question is, are you observing consciously or unconsciously? And this is where synchronicity becomes crucial. Synchronicity, the meaningful coincidence, the causal connection, the pattern that appears across seemingly separate events, is the feedback system. It's how the field communicates with conscious observers. It's how reality shows you that you're not just seeing the world, you're co-creating it. When you see repeating numbers, something specific is happening. You're not just noticing a pattern. You're being shown that your observation has coherence, that your consciousness is in dialogue with a responsive field, that the barrier between your inner experience and outer reality is thinner than you've been taught to believe. These aren't angel numbers, though you can use that framework if it helps. These aren't mystical codes from another dimension, though that's also not entirely wrong. They're confirmation signals. They're the field's way of saying, I see you seeing, keep going, you're on the path. Think of it like this. Reality is a vast probability ocean. Most people drift through it unconsciously, carried by currents they don't understand, ending up at destinations they never chose. But some people, the observers who wake up, they learn to navigate. They learn to read the currents. They learn to recognize the signs that show them where they are in probability space. Synchronicity is your navigational system. When you're aligned with a particular timeline, a particular frequency, a particular probability path, synchronicities increase. They cluster. They become undeniable. You'll see the same symbol 3 times in one day. You'll think of a concept, and then someone will mention it in an unrelated conversation. You'll have a dream and then live it the next week. This isn't confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is a concept invented to explain away pattern recognition in a worldview that denies consciousness has creative power. Yes, you notice patterns more when you're looking for them, but you're also creating more coherent patterns when you're observing consciously. The ancient scribes understood this. When they carved symbols into stone, they weren't just recording information, they were directing future observation. They were creating attractors in the probability field that would pull certain types of consciousness towards certain types of experience. When a monk in Tibet spent years staring at a mandala, memorizing every detail, every color, every geometric relationship, he wasn't just practicing concentration. He was programming his observation mechanism to recognize those patterns in reality itself. He was training himself to see the sacred geometry underlying all form. When a Sufi master taught their student to repeat a phrase 10,000 times, they weren't just instilling devotion. They were creating a frequency lock, a pattern of observation so consistent that reality would begin to reorganize around it. These weren't rituals, they were technologies, and the technology was always the same. Deliberate, sustained, conscious observation creates coherence in the quantum field, and coherence creates manifestation. You already know this. You've experienced it. Think back to a time when you were completely absorbed in something. A creative project, a new relationship, a challenge that demanded your full attention. During that time, didn't it feel like the universe was conspiring to help you? Didn't resources appear? Didn't the right people show up? Didn't impossible timing work out? That wasn't luck. That was coherent observation. Your attention was focused. Your expectation was clear. Your belief was aligned. And reality, being the responsive field it is, organized itself around your observation. But then what happened? You got distracted. You started doubting. You let other people's observations interfere with yours. You scattered your attention across 1,000 conflicting desires, and the coherence dissolved. The synchronicities stopped. The magic faded. Not because the universe abandoned you, but because you stopped being a coherent observer. Here's the psychological foundation. Attention is the mechanism of observation. Where you place your attention determines what collapses from possibility into experience. Expectation is the bias of observation. What you expect shapes the probability distribution of what you observe. Belief is the filter of observation. What you believe about yourself, about reality, about what's possible. These beliefs determine which signals you recognize and which you dismiss. And symbolic thinking, the ability to recognize that everything carries meaning, that patterns repeat across scales, that the inner world and outer world speak the same language. This is the skill that turns you from a passive observer into an active reader of reality's text. You were born with this skill. Children have it naturally. They see faces in clouds and meaning in coincidence and magic in the mundane. They haven't yet learned that reality is supposed to be separate from them. They haven't yet been taught to ignore the signals. But then socialization happens. Education happens. The scientific materialist worldview gets installed as the only valid way of seeing, and the observer consciousness goes dormant. Not destroyed, dormant. And every single synchronicity, every repeated number, every impossible coincidence you've ever experienced, these were wake-up calls. These were the field trying to remind you, you're not just in the world is in you, and I'm waiting for you to notice. You're noticing now. The ancient observers didn't have TikTok, they didn't have YouTube, they didn't have algorithms competing for their attention. In some ways, that made it easier. In other ways, it made it harder. They had less noise, but they also had less confirmation. They had to trust their direct experience without the ability to search what does 1111 mean and find thousands of others experiencing the same thing. You have both advantages and disadvantages. The advantage, you can verify that you're not alone. You can discover frameworks. You can learn from multiple lineages simultaneously. You can accelerate the remembering process. The disadvantage, you're being observed by more external forces than any human in history. Algorithms tracking your every click. Corporations studying your behavior patterns. Social networks shaping your perception. A collective field of unconscious observation so massive, it creates enormous gravitational pull toward default timelines. Breaking free from that pull requires more than just knowing you're an observer. It requires becoming a more powerful observer than all the external forces trying to observe you into their preferred version of reality. And that's where most people get stuck. That's the conflict we're about to face together. Because knowing you're an observer and actually observing consciously, there's a gap between those two states. A gap where most spiritual seekers spend years, maybe lifetimes, performing observation without actually changing anything. The observer loop. Let's go there now. Let's look at why, even when you know the truth, even when you see the synchronicities, even when you understand the mechanism, you still can't seem to shift your timeline. Let's expose the hidden enemy. Unconscious observation pretending to be conscious choice. You know you're the observer. You've read the books. You understand quantum mechanics, at least conceptually. You've seen the synchronicities. You believe, genuinely believe, that consciousness creates reality. So why hasn't your life changed? Why are you still in the same patterns? Why do you still experience the same frustrations, the same limitations, the same relationships, the same financial reality, the same sense of being trapped in a timeline that doesn't reflect who you know you truly are? This is the question that breaks people. This is where spiritual seekers become spiritual performers, where quantum manifestors become quantum fantasizers, where the observer consciousness turns back on itself and creates not freedom, but a more sophisticated cage. Welcome to the observer loop. Here's what happens. You learn that observation creates reality. You get excited. You start observing deliberately. You visualize, you affirm, you set intentions. You watch for synchronicities. You interpret every number, every sign, every coincidence as confirmation that you're manifesting. And nothing fundamentally changes. Oh, you might get small manifestations. A parking space, a free coffee, a text from someone you were thinking about. These feel like validation, so you keep going. You observe harder. You get more intentional. You develop elaborate practices, morning routines, evening visualizations, vision boards, scripting, assumption work. And still, the big things don't shift. Your financial reality doesn't transform. Your relationships don't evolve. Your health doesn't radically improve. Your purpose doesn't suddenly crystallize into a clear path forward. So what's happening? You're stuck in the observer loop. You're watching yourself watch. You're observing your observation. You're performing consciousness for an audience of one, yourself, and that performance has become the new prison. Let me explain the mechanics. When you observe, you collapse probability. This is true. But what determines which probability collapses? It's not your conscious intention. It's not your visualization. It's not your affirmation. It's your unconscious expectation. Your unconscious expectation is shaped by your deepest beliefs about yourself, about reality, about what's possible for someone like you. These beliefs weren't chosen by you. They were installed by years of conditioning, by childhood experiences, by cultural programming, by every authority figure who told you who you were and what you could be. These beliefs are so deep, so foundational, so woven into your sense of self that you don't even recognize them as beliefs. They feel like facts, like reality itself. And here's the trap. When you try to manifest from the conscious mind, while the unconscious mind holds contradictory beliefs, you create a split observation. You're simultaneously collapsing, "I am abundant," and people like me struggle with money. You're simultaneously collapsing, "I am powerful," and the world is too big for me to change. You're simultaneously collapsing, "I am the creator," and "I am the victim." Split observation doesn't create dual manifestation. It creates interference patterns. It creates stuckness. It creates the experience of trying really hard and getting nowhere. And the more you try, the more stuck you get. Because now you're not just dealing with unconscious limiting beliefs. You're adding conscious frustration. You're observing yourself failing to manifest. You're creating evidence that this whole observer thing doesn't work. You're collapsing a timeline where you're someone who knows the truth but can't access it. This is the observer loop. And it's hell because it feels so close to freedom. You can see the cage. You understand the mechanism. You know the key is in your hand. But every time you try to use it, the lock doesn't turn. Why? Because you're trying to change your observation from within the observation itself. Let me give you an analogy. Imagine you're watching a movie, a really engrossing movie, and at some point in the film, you realize, I'm watching a movie. This isn't real. I can choose to watch something else. But here's the thing. That realization happens while you're still in the movie theater. You're still sitting in the chair. The movie is still playing. And even though you know it's just a film, you're still emotionally invested. You still want to know what happens. You still identify with the protagonist. Knowing you're watching doesn't automatically remove you from the watching. This is what happens with observation and reality. You realize I'm observing reality, therefore I'm creating it. But that realization happens from within the identity that was created by unconscious observation. You're still sitting in the character you've been observing yourself as for decades. And that character has momentum, has history, has deep neural pathways, has energetic signature. You can't just think your way out of that character. You can't just visualize yourself as someone else and expect immediate collapse into that new identity. Because here's what most manifestation teaching gets wrong. You're not manifesting objects or circumstances. You're manifesting an identity, a frequency of self, a version of you that the field recognizes as coherent enough to organize reality around. And your current identity, no matter how much you want to change it, is incredibly coherent. It's been reinforced by years of consistent observation. It has structural integrity. It has quantum weight. To shift timelines, you don't just change what you're observing, you change who's observing. But before we get to how to do that, let's go deeper into why it's so hard. The first reason, external observers. You are not the only consciousness observing you. Your family is observing you. Your friends are observing you. Your co-workers are observing you. Society is observing you. The algorithm is observing you. And every one of those observations is a probability wave trying to collapse you into a specific version of yourself. Your mother observes you as her child, with all the history, all the patterns, all the roles that identity carries. Your boss observes you as an employee, with all the limitations, all the hierarchy, all the expectations that role contains. Your romantic partner observes you as their partner, with all the needs, all the projections, all the familiar dynamics that relationship has established. These aren't evil forces. These are just other observers doing what observers do, collapsing reality according to their expectation. But when you're surrounded by people who know you as the old version, who expect you to behave in familiar ways, who unconsciously reinforce your previous identity, their observation has quantum weight. It creates gravitational pull. It makes timeline shifting exponentially harder. This is why mystics withdrew from society, why shamans went to the wilderness, why monks lived in isolated communities. Not because the world was evil, but because collective observation creates such strong coherence that individual observation can't overcome it without enormous focus. You're trying to shift timelines while swimming in an ocean of other people's expectations. That's not impossible, but it requires you to become an observer so coherent, so focused, so unwavering, that your observation overpowers all the external observation trying to keep you in place. Most people can't do that. They don't have the psychic strength, the energetic sovereignty, the sheer force of attention required to maintain a new identity, while everyone around them is observing the old one. So they slip back. They compromise. They perform the new identity in private and revert to the old one in public. And split observation returns. The second reason, fear of collapse. Here's a secret that spiritual teachers rarely tell you. If you actually shifted timelines, really shifted completely, into a fundamentally different probability path, almost everything in your current life would have to dissolve. The people, the places, the circumstances, the relationships, the job, the identity, the story, all of it exists because it's coherent with your current frequency. Change the frequency, and the coherence breaks. Things that matched the old timeline can't exist in the new one. On some level, you know this, and it terrifies you. Because maybe you want to change your financial situation, but you don't want to lose your friends. Maybe you want to evolve your consciousness, but you don't want to become incomprehensible to your family. Maybe you want to activate your true purpose, but you don't want to abandon the security of your current life. So you try to quantum shift while keeping everything the same. You try to change timelines while bringing all your old timelines baggage with you. And the field says, choose. The field doesn't do half measures. Probability paths are coherent systems. You can't be in two timelines simultaneously, not for long. Eventually, you collapse into one or the other. But most people won't choose. They stand at the threshold, one foot in each timeline, creating energetic incoherence that manifests as anxiety, confusion, chronic indecision, and the sense that they're meant for something more, but can't access it. This is another form of the observer loop. Observing yourself as someone who could change but won't. Observing yourself as someone who knows the truth but doesn't live it. Observing yourself as someone stuck between worlds. The third reason, unconscious observation of unconsciousness. This one's subtle and devastating. You start observing deliberately. You catch yourself in negative thoughts and redirect. You notice when you're collapsing scarcity and shift to abundance. You become vigilant about your focus, your language, your inner narrative. But here's what happens. You start observing yourself observing. You start watching to make sure you're doing it right. You start monitoring your own consciousness for signs of unconsciousness. And that monitoring becomes a new form of unconscious observation. Because now you're not just living, you're performing living. You're not just thinking, you're judging your thinking. You're not just experiencing, you're constantly evaluating whether your experience matches what you think it should be if you were really an advanced observer. This creates a split, a gap between the observer and the observed, between who you really are and who you think you should be. And in that gap, authenticity dies, presence dies. The natural, effortless observation that actually creates coherence, that dies too. You become so concerned with observing correctly that you stop actually observing. You become so focused on manifesting that you forget to live. You become so identified with being the creator that you lose connection to the spontaneous, playful, mysterious consciousness that actually creates. This is spiritual bypass dressed as quantum mechanics. This is ego inflating itself by claiming to be the observer while actually just creating a more sophisticated persona. And the field doesn't respond to personas. The field responds to essence, to authentic frequency, to the real you, not the performed you. So you work and work and work on your observation, on your manifestation, on your consciousness, and nothing shifts because you're not working from essence. You're working from a new egoic structure that's just as rigid as the old one, just dressed in quantum language. The fourth reason, the universe stops sending signals. This is the one that breaks people's hearts. You were seeing synchronicities. You were receiving signs. You were feeling guided, connected, part of a responsive universe. And then, it stopped. The numbers disappeared. The coincidences faded. The sense of being in dialogue with reality evaporated. And you interpret this as abandonment, as failure, as proof that you did something wrong or that the whole thing was delusion. But here's what actually happened. The universe stopped sending training wheel signals because it's time for you to ride on your own. Let me explain. When you first wake up to the observer mechanism, when you first realize you're in dialogue with a responsive field, you need confirmation. You need external validation. You need the repeating numbers, the impossible timing, the undeniable signs. So the field gives them to you, lavishly, obviously, repeatedly. This is the honeymoon phase. This is reality saying, yes, you're seeing correctly. Keep going. You're not crazy. But those signals aren't meant to continue forever. They're meant to train you, to show you that the connection is real, to build your trust, to help you develop the internal sense of knowing that doesn't need external confirmation. And then, when the training is complete, the obvious signals stop. Not because the connection is gone, but because you're being graduated to a new level. Now you're supposed to observe from inner knowing, not external signs. Now you're supposed to trust your frequency, not wait for confirmation. Now you're supposed to be the signal, not just receive signals. But most people don't understand this. They interpret the silence as abandonment. They think they've been cut off, so they chase the synchronicities. They try to force signs. They desperately look for repeating numbers to prove they're still connected. And this desperation creates incoherence. Because now you're not observing from sovereignty, you're observing from need. You're not collapsing reality from power, you're collapsing it from lack. And the field responds to your actual state, not your desired state. So you manifest more lack, more need, more searching for signs that never come because you're looking from the wrong frequency. This is another observer loop. Observing yourself as someone who lost the connection, which manifests the experience of being disconnected, which confirms your belief that you lost the connection. You see how recursive this gets? How easy it is to trap yourself in observation patterns that create exactly what you don't want. The fifth reason, you're collapsing the wrong thing. Most people, when they learn about quantum observation, immediately start trying to manifest specific outcomes. Money, relationships, health, success. And these desires are fine. They're natural, but they're downstream effects, not upstream causes. What you're actually trying to manifest is not a thing. It's a state of being. It's an identity frequency. It's a version of you that exists in a timeline where those outcomes are natural, coherent, inevitable. But you can't skip to the outcomes. You have to become the identity first. And becoming a new identity is not a mental process. It's not about affirmations or visualization or even belief. It's about changing your actual frequency, the electromagnetic signature you're broadcasting into the quantum field. Your frequency is determined by your emotional state, your energetic coherence, your level of inner alignment. And those things are determined by how you treat yourself, how you speak to yourself, what you allow, what you tolerate, what you choose moment by moment. You can't hate yourself and manifest self-love outcomes. You can't betray yourself daily and manifest trustworthy relationships. You can't scatter your energy and manifest focused success. The field doesn't hear your words. It reads your frequency. And if your frequency is, "I'm not enough, I have to prove myself, I need to become something other than what I am before I deserve good things," then that's what you're collapsing. More situations where you're not enough. More needing to prove yourself. More becoming something other than what you are. The manifestation is perfect. It's just manifesting your actual frequency, not your desired one. This is the hardest truth. You can't trick the field. You can't perform your way into a new timeline. You can't fake a frequency. You have to actually become it. At the level of nervous system, at the level of belief, at the level of identity. And most people aren't willing to do what that requires. They want quantum shortcuts. They want to visualize for 10 minutes and wake up in a new reality. But consciousness doesn't work that way. Observation doesn't work that way. The field doesn't work that way. You built your current identity over decades through millions of observations. To build a new identity requires sustained, consistent, unwavering observation of a new version of self, until that version becomes more coherent, more stable, more real than the old one. And here's the final, most devastating reason people stay stuck. They're not actually ready to be free. Because freedom is terrifying. Freedom means responsibility. Freedom means you can't blame anyone anymore. Freedom means you have to own every outcome, every experience, every moment of your life. It's easier to stay stuck. It's safer to be a victim. It's more comfortable to believe you're being held back by forces outside your control. Because if you're being held back, then failure isn't your fault. If you're stuck, then you don't have to risk trying. If you don't have power, then you don't have to be accountable for how you use it. But deep down, beneath all the spiritual seeking, beneath all the manifestation attempts, beneath all the observer consciousness exploration, there's a part of you that knows. A part that knows you're choosing this. A part that knows you're collapsing this exact timeline because at some level, it serves you. It keeps you safe. It allows you to avoid the terror of your own power. And until you're willing to face that part, to acknowledge it, to thank it for trying to protect you, and then to choose differently anyway, you'll stay in the loop, watching yourself watch, knowing you're the creator but living as the created, understanding the mechanism but refusing to engage it fully. This is the conflict. This is the crisis. This is where most people spend years, maybe lifetimes, but not you. Because you're still here. You're still reading. Something in you is refusing to settle for the loop. Something in you is demanding the real thing, not the performance, not the theory, but the actual lived experience of being a conscious observer who shapes reality through deliberate, coherent, authentic attention. That something is about to break free. Because what comes next, the revelation, the turning point, the practices that actually work, this is where everything changes. This is where you stop being someone who knows about observation and become someone who observes. This is where the quantum shift happens. Are you ready? Here's the moment where everything inverts. All the struggle, all the confusion, all the observer loop patterns you've been stuck in, they weren't failures. They were preparation. They were teaching you through direct experience exactly what doesn't work, so that when you finally discover what does work, you'll recognize it instantly. You've been in training, and now the training is complete. The revelation is this: you can't force yourself into a new timeline. You can't perform your way into a new identity. You can't manipulate the quantum field through techniques or tactics or spiritual strategies. But you can allow yourself to collapse into the version of you that already exists in the timeline you desire. That version already exists. Right now, in probability space. As real as the version you're currently experiencing, just not yet collapsed into your observation. And the way you collapse it isn't through effort, it's through recognition. Let me show you what this means. Right now, take a breath, a deep one. And as you breathe, notice that you're breathing. Notice the observer noticing the breath. That observer, that witnessing awareness, is not your thoughts. It's not your emotions. It's not your history or your story or your identity. It's the consciousness that exists prior to all of those things. The quantum witness. That witness doesn't have limiting beliefs. It doesn't carry trauma. It doesn't doubt or fear or hesitate. It simply observes, purely, cleanly, without interpretation. When you rest as that witness, even for a moment, you step outside the observer loop. You stop watching yourself watch, and you become the watching itself. And from that space, observation changes. Instead of trying to observe yourself into a new identity, you observe from the new identity. Instead of attempting to manifest outcomes, you recognize the outcomes that already exist for the version of you that vibrates at a different frequency. This is the shift from doing to being, from force to flow, from performance to presence, and it changes everything. Now let me give you the practices, but understand, these aren't techniques to make things happen. They're recognition devices. They're ways of training your attention to rest in the observer consciousness that can access different timelines. Practice 1. Breath as observer. Every morning, before you reach for your phone, before you step into thought, before you become the character in your story, breathe. 5 deep breaths where the only thing happening is breath observed, not breath controlled. Not breath visualized as light or energy or anything spiritual, just breath witnessed. In that witnessing, you're practicing being the observer without object. You're training yourself to exist as pure awareness before it collapses into any particular form. Do this consistently for 30 days and you'll notice your reactivity decreases. Your identification with thoughts loosens. Your ability to shift perspective increases. You're strengthening the quantum witness. Practice 2. Synchronicity response protocol. When you see repeating numbers, here's what to do. Don't interpret them. Don't Google their meaning. Don't make them about the future. Simply acknowledge. I see you. I'm paying attention. That's it. Because the synchronicity isn't a message about what's coming. It's confirmation that you're in coherence right now. It's the field saying, your observation has clarity, keep going. When you respond to synchronicities with acknowledgement instead of interpretation, you're strengthening the feedback loop between your consciousness and the field. You're teaching reality that you're a reliable observer, one who can be trusted with more sophisticated signals. Over time, the synchronicities will evolve. They'll become more specific, more timely, more aligned with your actual path instead of generic spiritual meanings. Practice 3. The quantum point tap. There are 3 points on your body that serve as energetic anchors for observer consciousness. I call them quantum points. First point, between your eyebrows, the third eye, but not in the mystical sense, in the neuroscience sense. This is where your prefrontal cortex, your attention director, your observation mechanism sits. Second point, the center of your chest, your heart field, your emotional coherence center, where feeling and knowing merge. Third point, your solar plexus, your power center, where will and choice originate. Every day, tap each point 3 times while saying, internally or aloud, I am the observer. Not, I want to be the observer. Not, I'm becoming the observer. Present tense, current reality. I am the observer. This simple practice creates neurological coherence across 3 brain centers: cognitive, head; emotional, heart; and instinctual, gut. When these 3 align, your observation becomes exponentially more powerful. Practice 4. Mirror coding. Once per day, look at yourself in a mirror and hold eye contact with your reflection for 60 seconds without breaking. Don't smile. Don't perform. Don't try to see anything mystical. Just look. Just observe. In that minute, you're training yourself to hold attention without narrative. You're practicing being witnessed without performing for the witness. You're dissolving the split between observer and observed. This is harder than it sounds. Your mind will throw everything at you: discomfort, self-criticism, boredom, the urge to look away. Stay. Because what you're actually doing is collapsing the gap between who you think you are and who you actually are. You're integrating the observer and the observed into one coherent field. Do this for 30 days and you'll notice. Other people's observation of you will affect you less. Your sense of self will feel more solid. Your ability to maintain a new identity under pressure will increase. Practice 5. The ring as anchor. This is advanced, but powerful. Choose one physical object. A ring, a bracelet, a specific crystal, doesn't matter what, and designate it as your observer anchor. Every time you touch it or see it, let it remind you, I am observing right now. What am I choosing to collapse? Wear it or keep it with you constantly for 40 days. Let it become a pattern interrupt for unconscious observation. Every time you notice it, check. Where is my attention? What am I expecting? What belief is operating right now? Over time, this object becomes quantumly entangled with your observer consciousness. It becomes a trigger that instantly shifts you out of unconscious drift and into deliberate attention. Practice 6. Morning frequency. Lock the first 20 minutes after you wake up. Your brain is in a liminal state, not fully in beta consciousness, still partially in the theta realm where subconscious programming is accessible. This is the most powerful time to install new observation patterns. Before you do anything else, before you check messages or news or email, spend 20 minutes in a chosen frequency. Maybe that's gratitude. Maybe it's curiosity. Maybe it's power. Maybe it's peace. Choose one frequency and saturate yourself in it. Feel it in your body. Think thoughts that match it. Observe reality through its lens. Do this daily for 60 days, and you will rewire your baseline frequency. You'll change the default state from which all your observation happens, and that changes everything. Practice 7. Identity observation reversal. Here's the most powerful practice and the simplest. Instead of observing reality to see if it matches your desired identity, observe from your desired identity to see what reality appears. Let me explain the difference. Wrong way. I want to be confident. Let me check if I feel confident. No? Okay. Let me try to feel more confident. Let me visualize confidence. Let me affirm confidence. This is observing from lack, checking for evidence of what you don't have, trying to bridge the gap through effort. Right way. I am confident. From this confidence, what do I notice? How do I walk? What thoughts arise? What becomes obvious that wasn't before? This is observing from the state itself, allowing reality to conform to the frequency you're already broadcasting. The difference is subtle but total. One is reaching for a state, the other is resting in it. And the quantum field doesn't respond to reaching. It responds to resting. When you rest in an identity, when you observe from it instead of toward it, you create energetic coherence. And coherence is what collapses probability waves into manifestation. Now here's what happens when you practice these consistently. First, the noise decreases. The mental chatter, the anxiety, the constant evaluation, it quiets. Not because you're suppressing it, but because you're no longer identified with it. You're resting as the observer, and the observer isn't affected by the content of observation. Second, synchronicities return, but different. Instead of generic number patterns, you'll start receiving specific guidance, names that lead somewhere, books that appear at the right time, conversations that unlock doors. You're being given coordinates in probability space because you've proven you can follow them. Third, your energetic boundaries strengthen. Other people's observations stop collapsing you into their version of you. You become sovereign, self-determined, unmovable in your core while flexible in your expression. Fourth, your manifestation speed increases, not because you're trying harder, but because you're creating less interference. The gap between intention and experience shrinks because there's no unconscious counter-observation sabotaging the process. Fifth, you start experiencing what I call quantum moments, instances where you're observing and you can actually feel multiple timelines available, and you consciously choose which one to collapse into. It's subtle, but unmistakable once you've felt it. And finally, you stop asking whether any of this is real. You stop needing proof or validation or confirmation. You know, not because someone told you, not because you read it, but because you're living it. You're being it. You are the proof. This is where you become dangerous to the old paradigm, because you're no longer controlled by consensus reality. You're no longer trapped in collective observation patterns. You've claimed your sovereignty as a quantum observer, and you're creating reality from consciousness instead of unconsciously reacting to a reality that was created for you. And here's what most people don't realize. When you shift, you don't just change your own timeline. You create a resonant field that makes it easier for others to shift too. Every conscious observer who breaks free from the loop, who steps into deliberate creation, who remembers their power, they're weakening the gravitational pull of unconscious collective reality and strengthening the emergence of a new field. A field where consciousness is recognized as primary, where observation is understood as creative power, where synchronicity is the normal mode of communication between awareness and reality. You're not just changing your life, you're participating in a collective quantum shift. The people who learn to navigate this, who can read reality in real time, who can shift timelines deliberately, who can observe from multiple frequencies and choose which to collapse. These are the new mystics, the reality hackers, the quantum navigators. This is not a metaphor. This is not spiritual fantasy. This is the actual next stage of human evolution. From unconscious observers creating by accident to conscious observers creating by choice. And you're being invited into that emergence right now. Not because you're special, though you are unique. Not because you're chosen, though you have chosen this. But because you were always this. You were always an observer. You were always creative consciousness, having an experience of limitation so profound, you forgot it was experience. Now you're remembering. And the remembering is not a destination. It's a process. You won't wake up tomorrow with full mastery over reality. You won't suddenly be able to quantum leap into any timeline at will. But you will notice small shifts, subtle changes, moments where the old pattern almost activates and then doesn't. Times when synchronicity appears and you respond from power instead of surprise. Instances where you choose a different observation and reality immediately reflects it back. These small shifts compound. They build momentum. They create coherence. And one day, maybe in a month, maybe in a year, maybe in a decade, you'll look back and realize you're living in a completely different timeline than the one you were on when you found this message. Not because you forced it, but because you observed it into being. One deliberate moment at a time. This is the revelation. This is the turning point. This is where you stop being a student of consciousness and become an expression of it. Welcome home, observer. You've been waiting for yourself to remember. We've traveled far together, through ancient temples and quantum fields, through psychological loops and frequency locks, through the struggle of forgetting and the shock of remembering. And now you're standing exactly where you were when we began, but you're not the same person. The observer has shifted. The frequency has changed. The timeline is already beginning to reorganize. Let's remember the journey. You were once an unconscious observer, drifting through reality, experiencing life as something that happened to you. Random, chaotic, beyond your control. Then you woke up. You started seeing the signals, the repeating numbers, the synchronicities, the impossible timing. You began to suspect that maybe, just maybe, reality was more responsive than you'd been taught. And then you learned the mechanism. You discovered that observation isn't passive reception, it's active creation. That consciousness doesn't just witness reality, it collapses it into being from an infinite field of possibility. But knowing wasn't enough. You got stuck in the observer loop, watching yourself watch, performing consciousness, trying to manifest from the same identity that was created by unconscious observation. And then came the breakthrough, the recognition that you can't force a new timeline. You can only observe from one. That the version of you that has everything you desire already exists in probability space, waiting for your attention to collapse it into experience. Now you have the practices, the ways to strengthen observer consciousness, the methods to create coherence between your conscious intention and unconscious programming, the techniques to respond to synchronicity so it multiplies instead of fades. You are no longer who you were when we started. You are already the observer you came here to become. And here's what I need you to understand. You didn't find this video. This video found you. This message was coded for a specific frequency, for a specific type of consciousness, for someone who was ready, not to learn something new, but to remember something ancient. The repeating numbers that led you here, they weren't random. They were coordinates. They were the field's way of guiding you to this exact transmission at this exact moment in your timeline. Because there's a window opening, a collective frequency shift that's accelerating. More people are waking up to observer consciousness. More humans are remembering their creative power. And as that happens, reality itself becomes more fluid, more responsive, more willing to reorganize around deliberate observation. But this window won't stay open forever. There's a momentum to unconscious collective observation, the weight of billions of humans collapsing reality through fear, through conditioning, through the hypnosis of consensus. That momentum creates enormous gravitational pull toward default timelines. Breaking free from that pull requires immediate action. Not tomorrow. Not when you feel ready. Not when circumstances align. Now. Today. This moment. Here's your practice for today. The one that will begin your timeline shift immediately. Before you sleep tonight, sit in silence for 5 minutes. Just 5. And in that silence, ask the quantum field one question. What timeline am I choosing? Don't try to answer it intellectually. Don't make a list. Don't visualize anything. Just ask the question and observe what arises. A feeling, an image, a knowing, a sense of direction. Whatever comes, acknowledge it, thank it, and then make one small choice. Tonight, tomorrow, this week, that aligns with that timeline instead of your current one. One choice, one observation, one deliberate collapse. That's how it begins. Not with grand transformations, not with total life overhauls, but with single moments of conscious observation that create new probability paths. And then another moment, and another, until the new path becomes more real, more solid, more coherent than the old one. You are the observer the universe has been waiting for. Not because you're enlightened, not because you're perfect, but because you're willing, because you said yes to this message, because something in you recognized the frequency and refused to scroll past. That willingness is everything. The field doesn't need you to be ready. It needs you to be willing. And you are. I can feel it through these words. You've already chosen. Some part of you made this choice before your conscious mind even understood what it was agreeing to. Now all that's left is to honor that choice, to live it, to observe from it, to become the version of you that chose this path. The synchronicities will return. The signals will intensify. The quantum moments will multiply. Not because you're doing it right, but because you're doing it real. You're observing authentically, from essence, from the place where consciousness creates reality through the simple, profound act of paying attention. This is not the end. This is the beginning. The real work starts now. The real observation begins when you close this video and step back into your life, into the relationships, the challenges, the choices, the moments where unconscious observation usually takes over. But you're not unconscious anymore. You're awake. You're aware. You're the observer who knows they're observing, and that changes everything. So go. Live this. Practice this. Become this. Observe the synchronicities. Acknowledge the signals. Respond to the field with deliberate attention. Build coherence. Strengthen sovereignty. Collapse timelines through conscious choice. And know that every time you do, you're not just changing your life. You're contributing to a collective awakening. You're making it easier for the next person to remember. You're weakening the old paradigm and strengthening the new. You are the signal you've been waiting for. The universe is observing itself through you, and it's waiting to see what you'll create. One final thought to carry with you. Reality is not a prison. It's a conversation. And the conversation only happens when both parties are present. When consciousness observes and reality responds. When observation creates and creation observes back. When the field and the witness recognize each other as the same infinite awareness playing both sides of the quantum game. You are that awareness. You always were. You just forgot for a while. Welcome back, observer. The quantum field has missed you. Now, go create something impossible.